Welcome to Yellowstone Story. Every story holds a lesson, a twist, or a spark of inspiration. Here, we dive into gripping tales, some heartwarming, some shocking, but all unforgettable. So sit back, relax, and let's begin. I watched the children laughing and running around the playground in the park. I had been married to Alex for 7 years, yet I still hadn't been able to get pregnant. I had seen every possible doctor, taken dozens of tests, but every time I heard the same thing: everything is fine, you just need to wait. Alex never said anything out loud, but I saw the way he looked at me. I could feel that he blamed me. I had suggested he get checked as well, but he always brushed it off. I'm perfectly fine. And once again, I was left alone with my guilt, with that deep, hollow feeling inside. I turned away from the playground. How much I longed to hold a tiny hand in mine, to swing on the swings, to laugh with a child. But no. Instead, I headed to my car, deciding that today I definitely wouldn't go to the office. After all, it was my company, I could decide when to work. As soon as we arrived in the small town, I was enveloped by a completely different atmosphere. The warmth of a cozy home, welcoming hosts, the simple yet tangible comfort of real life, the scent of home-cooked food, the soft wool blanket draped over the couch, the cat that immediately curled up in my lap without waiting for an invitation. Everything here felt genuine, alive, nothing like the cold, meticulously structured world I had grown used to. For the first time in a long while, I felt myself relax. I enjoyed the dinner without thinking about how many extra calories were on my plate. No one here saw me as a businesswoman, someone constantly in control of everything. I was just Lauren, just a person. I woke up earlier than usual. Somewhere outside, cats were making a ruckus, but even that chaos felt oddly comforting. The day began with preparations for the local festival, and I quickly found myself immersed in the rhythm of it. Without much thought, I joined in, helping in the kitchen, chatting with people, letting myself be part of something simple and real. From behind me, I overheard 2 women talking. They were discussing Michael, curious about the woman he had brought with him. She seemed decent, they said, kind, easygoing, despite her status. But in the end, it didn't really matter who she was, as long as she was a good person. I smiled. Simple. Such a curious word, yet it held an entire meaning within it. For some reason, that small moment made me pause. Michael looked different, happy, free, as if something had changed. Was it just being back home, or was it something else? I searched for him in the crowd and froze. I had never thought he could look like that. In just shorts, his bare torso exposed, he worked alongside the local men, building benches. Despite the chaos of the festival preparations, he stood out among them. Something shifted inside me, and heat crept up my neck. Alex had always been lean, almost fragile, while Michael carried the strength of someone accustomed to physical labor. I quickly averted my gaze, but not before I noticed that he had caught my fleeting glance. The celebration turned out to be far more enjoyable than I had anticipated. Laughter, games, lively competitions, swimming in the river. I lost myself in the moment, leaving behind the weight of everything that had happened back in the city. For a while, the betrayal, the pain, the complete collapse of what I had once called my life, all of it faded into the background. I let myself relax, embrace the present, even taste the locally brewed beer that seemed to flow endlessly. As the festivities wound down, I instinctively moved to help clean up, but the hostess wouldn't hear of it. She insisted I simply enjoy the night. Wandering through the narrow streets, I felt Michael's presence beside me. He suggested showing me the river, and without hesitation, I agreed. A few days later, when I returned home, I found Alex waiting. His expression filled with confusion as I calmly told him my decision. He hadn't expected me to ask for a divorce. The house was filled with noise. His parents were there along with him. It took Alex only a few seconds to try and twist the situation, to claim that things with Lucille weren't serious, but none of it mattered anymore. His mother, however, didn't hold back. Her words were laced with anger, but I remained calm. The decision had already been made. I simply added one last thing. I had revoked the power of attorney I had once signed over to him. The room fell silent. The rest, I chose to erase from my memory. The shouting, the insults, the desperate justifications. None of it was my concern anymore. I had made my choice. Nearly 2 months passed. Work helped distract me, but exhaustion crept in waves. Julia, ever observant, noticed that I wasn't looking my best. In her usual playful way, she joked that my former mother-in-law must have put a curse on me. She had brought something from home, insisting that I eat. The rich scent of fried meat hit me instantly, and I barely made it to the bathroom before I threw up. The shock in Julia's eyes quickly shifted into realization. I brushed it off, but deep down something twisted inside me. Pregnant? No, that was impossible. It had to be exhaustion, stress, a coincidence. But memories of that night by the river, the ones I had been running from for weeks, resurfaced too vividly. Julia studied me carefully and asked outright. I couldn't lie. With a resigned nod, I confirmed what I had barely admitted to myself. She already knew everything about Michael, about how I had avoided him ever since the trip. She didn't push me for answers, but I could feel her silent reproach. Michael had changed too. He looked unbalanced, as if something inside him had shifted. I had stubbornly ignored it all, hoping time would set things right on its own. Left alone in the office, I stepped out of my room and headed for the exit. The light in Michael's office was still on. The moment I took a step toward his door, my heart pounded harder. My hand hesitated on the doorknob. A deep breath, and then I stepped inside. Michael looked up as he noticed me, but instead of reacting, he quickly turned his attention back to the papers in front of him, pretending to be busy. I smiled, though my nerves tightened inside me. Admitting feelings had never been easy, and right now it felt almost impossible. The words escaped before I had time to fully think them through. Michael turned sharply, his gaze locking onto mine, searching for something. Silence stretched between us, but instead of tension, there was something else, anticipation, a quiet understanding. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for in response, but I saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. He took a step closer. Summoning the last of my courage, I told him that I was no longer alone. His brow lifted slightly, not in shock, but in something closer to quiet astonishment, like he hadn't expected the words to come so easily. When he finally pulled me into his arms, I felt weightless, as if all the burdens of the past had been left behind. In that moment with him, nothing else mattered. "I'm not letting you go," he murmured, holding me close. I laughed, feeling warmth spread through me. There was only one way to respond to that, with a smile. Perfect. I'll be walking around in oversized sweaters, holding a cup of tea all the time. Michael just looked at me and smiled. I'm okay with that. The business had come to me from my father, providing a stable income and a comfortable life. When I married Alex, I believed it was love, though my friends always said my mind was too cold for true passion. Maybe they were right. I had waited for that kind of love, the kind from the movies, but either it never happened, or I simply wasn't capable of feeling it. Our marriage was stable, but at times unbearably dull. I had just pulled out of the parking lot near the park when my phone rang. Julia's name flashed on the screen. "Lauren, we urgently need the lease agreement for the new building. We've searched everywhere, but there are no copies. Can you bring it?" Her anxious voice came through the speaker. Oh, Julia, always finding a way to disrupt my plans. I had just decided to take a day for myself, and here she was. "Of course, I'll bring it," I replied, setting my phone down on the seat. The documents she needed were at Alex's parents' house. On the day we signed the agreement, I had gone there straight from work, where Alex was already waiting for me. It had been one of those rare evenings when we stayed overnight, My relationship with my in-laws was always polite and cordial, but never particularly warm. They never asked for anything directly, though Alex would occasionally hint that they could use some help. Their house was large, spacious, with multiple entrances. I had insisted on this design during construction, convincing myself that it would make things more convenient for everyone. As I unlocked the gate and walked toward my entrance, Julia's earlier remark echoed in my mind, that anyone would be polite if they lived in a mansion without financial worries. Maybe there was some truth to her words. I quickly found the folder I needed and was about to leave when voices from the next room made me pause. Alex's parents were discussing him and me. I took a step toward the door, then froze. I had never been one to eavesdrop, but something in their tone made me stop in my tracks. Muffled voices seeped through the wall, but every word cut like a knife. My mother-in-law spoke about me as if I were a stranger, an outsider, just a temporary obstacle in their way. Her tone was cold, filled with irritation and contempt. She was tired of pretending to be polite, exhausted from forcing a smile just so I would continue financing their comfortable life. But the worst part was yet to come. They had a plan. She and Alex had talked about it, recalling the time when I hastily transferred my company to him to deal with tax complications. That decision, made in a moment of crisis, had given him control over everything I had built. Now, according to their plan, he could sell the business, cast me aside, and bring home a real woman, one who could give him a child. They had even done their legal homework, making sure Alex could get away with it unscathed. A woman named Lucille had helped them, someone I had never even heard of before. A wave of paralysis washed over me. A lump formed in my throat, my fingers gripping the folder so tightly my knuckles turned white. Everything I had worked for, everything I had believed was mine, had been reduced to nothing more than a convenient asset, one they could dispose of as easily as our marriage itself. The conversation behind the door continued, but I could no longer bear to listen. They were going over the details, discussing Alex, fine-tuning their plan. My mother-in-law's voice carried a sense of satisfaction, and Lucille's name surfaced too many times to be insignificant. I rushed out of the house, barely aware of my own movements. My heart pounded in my chest, my thoughts tangled into a mess of disbelief and anger. Everything I had believed to be solid and unshakable had crumbled in an instant. My car sped away, but the drive to the office passed in a blur. I handed the documents to the security guard without registering his words, and found myself behind the wheel once more. A conversation with Alex was inevitable. I needed the truth. I needed to know who Lucille was and just how deep his betrayal ran. But first, I had to pull myself together. Just as I was about to drive off, I noticed Michael, the head of security, striding toward my car with purpose. Without hesitation, he slid into the back seat, his sharp gaze assessing me. It wasn't until that moment that I realized how badly my hands were shaking. Michael studied me for a brief moment, his expression unreadable, then silently reached for the wheel. Before I could protest, he was already driving. For the first time that day, I let myself breathe. The pain, the anger, the crushing disappointment momentarily receded, leaving behind only cold determination. I had always known how to fight. This time would be no different. When Michael pulled up in front of the notary's office, I didn't hesitate. Before I even fully processed my own words, I asked if he would go in with me. He didn't look surprised, as if the thought of leaving my side had never even crossed his mind. Everything went quickly. The notary had clearly been expecting me. The documents were signed, everything was finalized, and as we got back into the car, the tension eased slightly. One more step remained. Without offering any explanations, I directed us to the registration office. Michael didn't ask questions, and for that I was grateful. 40 minutes later, we stepped back outside. He remained as composed as ever, while I felt as though I had just run a marathon. My mind clung to a single question: should I go home? The thought of it made my stomach turn. That house no longer felt like mine. Going back meant facing everything I wanted to leave behind. Michael seemed to sense my hesitation and, without warning, made an unexpected suggestion. There was a festival happening in his hometown tomorrow, some kind of water celebration. A change of scenery might do me good. I hesitated. I had never looked at Michael as anything other than an employee. He was competent, reliable, always professional. I knew he had served in the military, but beyond that, I had never really considered him beyond the role he played in my life. But now, as I studied his calm expression, I realized he was younger than I had assumed. The faint streaks of gray in his hair only added to his presence, making him seem even more grounded. What reason would he have to lie to me? Why did it matter so much to him that I pulled myself together? My mind swirled with too many questions, but the one thing I knew for sure, I didn't want to go home. I agreed to the trip almost impulsively, but deep down, I felt it was the right choice. Before leaving, we stopped at a store. I couldn't show up at his parents' house empty-handed.